Hello class, in this video we are going to tackle one of the biggest issues in the English 111 course, which is revision. How do you get from the germ of an idea to a mass of sentences related to that idea to a structured, organized essay that can live completely on its own without any explanation from you, the writer, and can be understood by someone and can be understood by a reader who you've never met before, who could be at any place at any time. So that is the goal of revision, and that is why the writing process is emphasized by your writing teachers so much. And that's why you're often finding that you're having to walk through step by step on the same essay. Here in this video we're going to take a look at a writing prompt. We're going to look at an existing free writing draft, which is a lot of good ideas with some gestures towards organization, but it's still in one mass in one paragraph. And then we're going to look at some questions you would ask yourself as the writer as you start to break that down, make decisions about those ideas, and start to move towards a more structured presentation of your position. So let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll give this draft a reading. Which kids have the best or worst time in a family? The oldest child, the middle child, or the youngest child, and why? So here you clearly see you are going to make an argument responding to this prompt. You're going to have an arguable thesis because, as you can imagine, there are legitimate points for each one of these. I myself have 3 children, and I can tell you the oldest one thinks it's hard to be the oldest, the youngest one thinks it's hard to be the youngest, and the middle one thinks it's hard to be the child in the middle. So this has an arguable thesis because reasonable people can disagree about it, and there are valid points on, in this case, all 3 sides of the argument. So what does that mean? It means that you need to use all of your writing tools to create something that is, if not convincing, at least interesting and compelling for someone who might disagree with you. That's all kind of set up in context for our real subject here, which is moving from a free write to a draft. So what we have here is basically a free write. I used to have a teacher who called this the quote-unquote zero draft. This is the first flush of ideas that you have. In this case, and in this style of pre-writing or of drafting, you're not thinking about an outline, you're not thinking about organization, you're just trying to kind of survey the scene, pick your own brain, and see what are your ideas about this topic. That is a great way to start. It lets you begin to generate ideas. And your ultimate goal in revision is to generate the best ideas you can, to learn how to cut the ideas that you do not need, and how to seek out and develop the ideas that are best and that do serve you as a writer and serve the assignment that you're trying to fulfill. Let's give this draft a read. I think the middle child has the worst time in the family. I say this from my own experience. My own middle child has told me the same because the oldest and youngest child have a lot of attention due to the fact that they are the oldest and youngest. Although I do believe being the middle child has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that you have an older sibling and you'll always have that role model figure in your life. Also, you have a younger sibling that you can be a role model for. Another advantage is that your parents aren't as focused on you as they are on the other siblings, so that gives you more freedom. A disadvantage could be that the middle child tends to feel more invisible compared to their siblings because of this. Being a middle child is also difficult because you can't bond with either your older sibling or your younger sibling depending on the age. So you can see in here there are lots of elements of essay structure that we've been talking about. There are transition words like although and also. We can see a clear thesis claim at the beginning. I think the middle child has the worst time in a family. We can see the idea of advantage and disadvantage. So we can see almost a compare-contrast structure kind of hiding in this free-write draft. So you'd want to ask yourself as a writer, where do I go from here? So if I'm the writer of this essay, I'm going to look at my free-write and ask myself some questions. What you see here is that I have broken up the single paragraph that this was, just using line breaks just to organize it for myself. And I've identified a couple of things that I would want to think about as a writer. You see two sentences in bold. The two sentences in bold are, number one, I think the middle child has the worst time in a family, and number two, although I do believe being the middle child has its advantages and disadvantages. Now, why are these two in bold? Because as I reread this, I think these are two competing thesis claims, right? One says the middle child has it harder, and then you can almost see halfway through the draft, halfway through the free write, you think to yourself, well, you know what, there are advantages and disadvantages. So we almost have a competing second thesis that emerges, which is I believe there are both advantages and disadvantages. This is a way of saying that very often in the drafting process, you're going to have to decide what you want your thesis to be, especially with assertion with evidence, persuasion, and with research too, because you have to understand your research question. You're going to have to go through a process of discovering what do I really want to argue, what do I really want to claim. So the main thing that I would look at in here as a writer is to think, well, which way do I want to go? We can see that the writer has then kind of laid out advantages and disadvantages. And very often they're two sides of the same coin, right? So one of the advantages is that your parents aren't as focused on you if you're in the middle, because they're focused on the oldest and youngest, who are, you know, the first one doing everything in the family, and then the baby of the family. So both of those draw more attention for different reasons. That's an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage, as the writer notes, because then you feel more invisible compared to your siblings. So the writer of this draft recognizes that there are two sides to the argument, and each advantage has its flip side, which is a disadvantage. Where does that leave you? It means that you as the writer have to decide what needs to get cut and what needs to be further developed. The multiple steps in the writing process are there to assist you in deciding what you really want to claim and how you really want to support it.